Our moderator tonight is Bill Batson. An artist, writer, and activist, Bill Batson serves as a communications and development advisor for the Friends of Riverhook. He is also a trustee of the Historical Society of the Nyack, the co-sponsor of tonight's program, where he chairs the John Scott Armchair Tour Committee. Other board posts include his role as the communications chair of the Nyack branch of the NAACP, and before joining the Friends of Riverhook in August of this year, Bill was the marketing manager for the Nyack Chamber of Commerce. He is the weekly author and illustrator of the Nyack Sketch Log, which appears every Tuesday on nyacknewsandviews.com. Bill will be our moderator for this evening. Take it away, Bill.
Thank you very much, Rosemary. Before I introduce the first of 3 segments for this evening's Armchair Tour, allow me to say a few words about our program's namesake. John Scott was the senior historian of the Historical Society of Rockland County and was a great collector and learned presenter of local history with a contagious enthusiasm. He developed and put on fascinating slide talks about significant subjects from our past that became known as armchair tours. Scott was also the great uncle of Riverhook board member Laurie Dodge. Since his death, the tradition of the armchair tour has been carried on in his name by the Friends of Nyack and now by the Historical Society of the Nyack. I'm so proud to welcome you to the first Armchair Tour of 2020, a year that armchair tours were designed for. Also, briefly, Rosemary, could we unmute so that we can give our 135 participants a nanosecond to hear what a round of applause would sound like from what I believe we can safely say is one of the largest Zoom events in Nyack Zoom history. That sounds great. It's great to see you and hear you. Back to mute. This evening, we intend to give you a sense of the present, the past, and the future of a 12-acre parcel of land in Upper Nyack, Riverhook, the Hester, Haring, Cason Preserve. But first, and I think properly, let's dwell in the present moment. Here's a short visual poem by documentary filmmaker and editor Pascal Cason. Cason's films have appeared on PBS, ABC, NBC, CBS, and National Geographic. His body of work also includes Fire in the Blood, an internationally acclaimed documentary that opened at Sundance, and Easy Rider Raging Bulls, which also opened at Slamdance and garnered much international attention. And now, Cason, who will be available later in the program for any questions you have, will welcome you all to Riverhook.
Okay, hello, here we go.
Oh, okay. Oh. Want it. No, like in detail. Don't do that. It's very, because there's details here. A lot of cool details. I don't think we're supposed to unmute. Then somebody said,
It's Julie.
hi.
Thank you very much,
Can't wait.
Pascal.
Oh.
Right here, everybody clapping. Thank you, Pascal. I think because of the number of people on this call, the bandwidth was a little, problematic, but it was a beautiful, beautiful presentation. I love the cameos from our feral friends, the deer and the bees. So we're going to start now looking back at the history of the Hester Haring Cason Preserve. Mike Hayes is a 34-year resident of the Nyax. Hayes grew up the son of a professor and a nurse in Champaign, Illinois. He has recently retired from a long career in educational publishing with Prentice Hall and McGraw-Hill. Hayes is an avid cyclist, amateur historian, photographer, gardener, and dog walker, but I think he's going to have to revise his resume to say professional historian. He sits on the boards of Merrydell, the Historical Society of the Nyax, the Rockland Cycling Club, and the Edward Hopper House Museum and Study Center. He has enjoyed more years than he cares to count with his beautiful companion, Bernie Ritchie. You can follow Mike on Instagram as Upper Nyack Mike, or you may enjoy, as I do, his weekly column on NyackNewsAndViews.com, Nyack People and Places. I am proud to introduce this year's John Scott Armchair Tour Lecture by Mike Hayes. Take over, Mike.
Well, thank you, Bill, and I hope everyone can see my screen right now.
Trying to see where you.
It's usually on the long side, one on the long
I
side.
see it fine, just fine.
We're going to mute everybody again. If you're not muted, please go ahead and mute yourself.
Well, I'm not gonna mute myself, Bill. So, listen, I wanted to start with a little music to get us in the mood of many years ago, particularly the 1930s, sort of to kick off the mood for our history of Riverhook. I'm Michael Hayes, as Bill mentioned, and thank you so much for the introduction, Bill. I'm here representing the Historical Society of the Nyax. I'm really proud to say that the Historical Society of the Nyax is moving up in the world. In fact, we're moving from the basement of 50 Piermont Avenue up to the first floor. So we're in the process of making that move, and we're really hopeful that sometime soon we'll be holding events and exhibits at a real new space that looks out over Memorial Park and the Hudson River. And it's really a great, it's going to be a great museum presence. So you can visit us at our website, at the Historical Society of the Nyax. And of course, we appreciate any donations that you may feel like contributing. So let's start with our history. There we go. Okay, so here's a list of Riverhook landowners over a long period of time. And you'll notice in the list, there's quite a range of people. We've had a Revolutionary War hero. We've had a Confederate general. We've had a woman who was the women's doubles tennis champion for the United States. So we've got a wide cast of characters. We can't talk about all those people. And in fact, what we're going to do in our brief history tonight is take a look at the times and the people for which we have maps, photographs, or documents to show you. It goes without saying that, of course, the indigenous people shared in common this land before settlers claimed ownership of it. And I think it's fitting and proper that now the village of Upper Nyack has this land in common with the people. So we've kind of come full circle. First up, we're going to look at 1776. This is a map created by Upper Nyack historian Win Perry, one of his great maps. And this is a time when Upper Nyack is now comprised of 6 farms. We're in the 3rd generation. So through inheritance, the land is getting broken up in the strips that you will see later on and keep being subdivided. I want us to look at the one on the very north. This is just under Hook Mountain. This is the property of John Smith, or Major Smith. Major Smith was in charge of the shore militia during the Revolutionary War, along with his brother who lived next door, Laurie Smith, who was a captain. So Major and Captain Smiths kind of directed locally the militia. What would happen is the British would come up the river in their boats, anchoring off of Tarrytown, and then just for to maraud the shores, they would take gunboats over towards Nyack and attempt to steal anything they could, men, livestock, food, money, whatever they could find. So with the leadership of these two guys, the British never landed on shore. They were fought off in 3 different places over time. John Smith, however, his house would always be shelled. This is his house down there on the shore, just under Hook Mountain. Now, River Hook property is this part of Smith's property right here, bordering with his brother's property. So, you know, cannonballs went flying everywhere. And it's just possible that one day, somewhere in that front meadow, someone will turn up one of those British cannonballs. So we're going to make a jump. Now we move forward another 100 years. We're at 1876 in this map. And we'll see, you know, the map is, we're further subdivided by property over time. This is a period when Upper Nyack there's a village, is 4 years old. So it's still not a lot of houses in Upper Nyack. And by the way, we're just 2 years from the sesquicentennial for Upper Nyack. So that will be happening soon. Now we're going to take a close-up view of this particular map. And let me get us oriented. So this is Broadway. This is Lexow Street. And you just see a little bit of Midland up here. So Lexow is the only street 150 years ago that was connecting north and south, north of Old Mountain Road. The borderline of the old John Smith's property is right here. And you'll see these 2 pieces of land are owned by Mr. E.H. Owen. Owen was an attorney and a judge in New York City who bought the property, and he used this as a summer home. So he's the first of the wealthy people who came to Upper Nyack buying property, either dwelling in an existing house or building something new, largely for the summer only. You will notice here the winding road, the road that we saw in the beautiful movie we started with. And you will notice 3 buildings here on his property. So this is the main house and 2 other outbuildings, which is the buildings relationship is very much as we see today. So it's my belief that these buildings date back to this period. On the left, we see the stable carriage house as it exists now, built with native field stone. And on the right, a cottage that's really a derelict building. But you'll notice on the foundation is made of locally quarried sandstone. So this building has a considerable age to it. So we've got 2 buildings on the property that date back to the middle of the 19th century. Now, we'll take a look at today. This is a view from Hook Mountain, looking out over Upper Nyack. And I don't know what you see here, but one thing I notice is that you can see no roads. And why can you see no roads? Because there are lots of trees. And that's characteristic of our village now. It's really covered in trees. The only open space is this field in front of Marydale. Now, if we go back, and this is one of the first pictures we have, this is a view from Hook Mountain, looking out over Upper Nyack in 1880, just about the time of the last map we looked at. Ben Wagner is a Nyack photographer. He had a studio on South Broadway. This is actually a part of a stereoscope. So, you know, you'd have 2 pictures from slightly different angles, put them in a little device, and you'd stare through the viewer, you could see things in 3-dimensional. So it was kind of a virtual reality of its day. What we're looking at here is this is Broadway running through Upper Nyack, and you'll see there are no trees anywhere in this area. There's some along here, but it's a fields. So it's a very different Nyack of 140 years ago than what we see today. Let's take a little closer look. And this is about the limits of resolution on that. We see really just three houses here along Broadway and a cluster over here. But what I wanted you to notice is here is the driveway curving around just as it is today. So we see the driveway, we have a hedge or wall right here. And this kind of tree area is the brook that runs alongside and crosses part of the property. So while Upper Nyack is mostly farmland, Riverhook on Broadway appears very much the same today as it was back in 1880. Now we're going to jump to 1906, and we're looking at a survey. This is the map done for the owner, Norman Dodge. Dodge was a businessman, and he got involved in the lumber business with the previous owner, a man named Joe Hilton, who sold him this property. Hilton moved down the street to a larger house on North Broadway. Dodge bought this place and used it as a summer dwelling. So what we see here is Broadway, here is Midland, and here is Riverhook as we know it now. What we're not seeing above it is another 20 acres. So this property was 30 acres large. There is simply no buildings there. We don't know if it was used as a field, whether it was a forest, whether it was used for crops, orchard, we don't know. What we see here up by Midland is this is a hay barn. This is the town pump. Now let's take a little closer look at the buildings in this illustration, in this survey. So here is our road, which goes to the property exactly as it does today. So the same footprint. Here is the estate house, and we have more buildings off to the side. Here's our cottage. We noticed in the last map. Here is the stable. Over here is the carriage house and a chicken coop, which no longer exists. I think you can find a little bit of the foundation if you look in that area. And over here, right on the property line, this is an outhouse and a couple of other outbuildings. This is the brook that runs through the corner of the property. And down here is the small dwelling made out of sandstone that still exists today. So this is the basic footprint that still exists. Now we're going to jump over to the Haring family and look first at William Post Haring. This is Mr. Haring right here. He grew up in Piermont, actually in the 1737 Underdunk House. He graduates from Tappan Zee School and immediately goes to Wall Street, not college, Wall Street. Takes a job as an executive assistant for two really wealthy Wall Street bankers. And he learns firsthand the banking, real estate, banking, and financial management position rather than that of an absolute stockbroker. That stands him instead well because he passes through the crash in pretty good shape. Clearly, he buys the Riverhook property in 1934, and builds a new house. So he's looking pretty good at that time. He marries Dorothy Folsom in 1923. They have one child, that's Hester Haring, in 1930. He's also heavily political. He's a mayor of Piermont, and then in Upper Nyack, he's also a trustee and assistant mayor for a long period of time. So we'll take another look at William Haring in his graduation picture. And these pictures, by the way, are courtesy of the Piermont Historical Society, which, thank goodness, happens to have the 1913 graduating class bulletin. And there's a lot of good stuff in there. But here again, off to the right, we see William Haring, along with his class of 12, 5 young men and 7 young women. So we jump to the point of 1934 when Haring buys the property that we call Riverhook from the Chapman family. The Chapman family moves just down the block. Seems to be a habit of people who live here. They move just down the block to Bellcrest, a couple of doors down on North Broadway, slightly bigger house. And what the Haring family does is hire the architect Julius Gregory. Gregory is a well-known New York City architect. He is known for having more homes in the historic district of Fieldston in Riverdale. And he published a lot in American Architect on the high end, and on the low end, he had things for House Beautiful and Home and Gardens. So he worked mostly in colonial revival, Gothic and medieval revival style housing. Some of his houses, by the way, in Fieldstone sell for $8 to $10 million. So they're pretty important dwellings. Here at Riverhook, we might say that this is a colonial revival with a little bit of Georgian revival in it, primarily from that it's stretched out and it's in brick. Characteristic of Gregory's architecture is the uneven roof line, which we see here, anchored by the two big chimneys. The detail of this house is fairly sophisticated. If you take the time to look at it, and I suggest you do, aside from seeing the slate and the copper gutters, the brickwork is really nicely done, even in details near the garage doors. It's just superbly done. It's also sited very well. So when you see it from Broadway, it's sort of hidden in the ledge above Broadway. And it took me a long time to realize that I was looking at the backside of the building from Broadway. This is the backside or the Broadway view, that the front of the house actually faces west and up a meadow. But at the same time, it's sort of hidden from Broadway. From the house itself, it has great views, at least in the winter now, of the Hudson River, and to the west, the sloping meadow in front of the house. So it really takes advantage of its location. Now, we have another interesting document. This is in the hands of the village of Upper Nyack. And I show it just because it's curious. It shows how the house was sited. This is a survey again. It's on its side this time. So Broadway runs along here. And there's a typical layout of the buildings that we're used to looking at. What makes this document unique is that someone, and I think it's probably the Harings, have shown the architect what they want. They've taken a yellow pen, scratched out the old building, drawn in this long building that is now the building that's there, X'd through the carriage house, chicken coop, and the cottage. So these were removed. This was changed as it was. Of course, the cottage is still there. So this shows the Haring hand in developing the property. If we look at the second floor plan, fairly ordinary. It has two guest rooms, a master bedroom. Off to the side here, we have two of the maid's rooms with a maid stairway. And here is Hester's nursery. So she moves here when she's 4 years old, and immediately her parents put bars over her window. Why would her parents put bars over the window? Well, this is 1934. In 1932, you have the trial of the Lindbergh kidnapping and murder. So this was in everyone's mind that an isolated country house from people with wealth was vulnerable, that someone would come in with a ladder and climb up the second floor and steal their daughter. So the Harings made a decision to put the bars on the windows, and the bars on the window remained, according to Hester, until she was 16 years old. So it wasn't until then that she really got the nice open window view of that beautiful meadow that we saw earlier in the film. The interior details, I think some of which we saw earlier, were also of Gregory's design. The stairwell is still in great shape and fabulous woodwork. And the dining room wallpaper and sconce are probably original. And we have this romantic wallpaper with romantic view of Native Americans and the first encounter with European settlers. We have one other document to look at in terms of the design, and that is the cottage along Midland Avenue, which exists, although not in this size or scale. It only has one floor. It doesn't have a wing on the other side. Again, we have the variable roof line of a Gregory building. It's made out of the same brick, has good brick detail, and the color of the brick in both buildings is absolutely beautiful. So the cottage would have been the home for a caretaker. If you can imagine, this property is 30 acres at the time. A guy who's working full-time in the city, probably long hours, there's not going to have much time left over for farming or keeping the property in shape. So they would have a caretaker, just as they had two maids. So this would have been the caretaker's dwelling. Okay, time we ask this question. When was Riverhook named? So on your right is an early, this is about World War I. There was a school for girls called Riverhook. It was actually in the field club on North Midland for a few years. And so, Riverhook, the primary features of the landscape here are the Hudson River and Hook Mountain. So it's natural that those two words kind of tend to define the area. So the name is in some usage. But in terms of the farm as we know it, I found the first usage in 1937, 3 years after the Harings moved into the property. So I suspect that they are the ones who named this property Riverhook. Most of the dwellings of some size along North Broadway have a name, whether it's Shadow Cliff, Larchdale, et cetera. So the naming convention was still a fairly strong one, even at this time. It's also possible that Riverhook could have been named before this. If so, I haven't really run across that. So I believe it's the Haring's name for this property. Now, we're going to jump to Hester Haring Cason, our preserve's namesake. We mentioned earlier that Hester grew up in a 1737 house in Piermont, came to Upper Nyack at age 4. She was a child of privilege. So we see in the newspaper that she attended the social events that would be mentioned in the newspaper, teas, socials, and so forth. She attends private school at Dwight Englewood, then becomes an art major at Bennington College. She graduates in 1952, tours Europe for a few months, and then she's home, living at home with her parents. So she gets a local job at Lamont Doherty, and we're going to talk a little more about that in a minute. In 1965, she meets Jim Cason. 1971, they get married, and they continue to live at Riverhook Farm. They have no children themselves. I must mention that the parents die in 1 year of each other in 59 and 60. So that is the time when the upper 20 acres get sold. I think her mother had started the process of sales, but it was finally signed off on by Hester. So this is the 20 acres north or west of Broadway. Kuyper Avenue runs right down the center of it. So those houses would have appeared after 1960, and one at a time. That 20 acres sold for $34,600. You can imagine that, $34,600. So after that point, Riverhook becomes the 12 acres that we know today. So let's talk a little bit about Lamont Doherty. First, there was a woman, a geophysicist, Maria Tharp, and she's shown here at a desk and a map, and she's plotting seabed soundings. This is actually, and according to Maria Tharp, what Hester Haring did. She took the data, used that quill pen, and carefully put it on the map at a scale of 1 to 1,000,000. So that was Hester's, who was Maria's assistant. That was her task. Why is that important? Well, here we have a 1957 seabed map of the Atlantic. And you'll see North America here on the left, you've got North Africa and Spain on the right, and you've got a lot of soundings in the middle. But what I want you to see is this little seam there. So what they discovered and put together on this map was the first time that we're showing the use of plate tectonics. This is where two plates come together or come apart. So this was the first evidence of continental drift in the theory of plate. It was no longer a theory, but an accepted fact of plate tectonics. So Hester Haring was there at one of the biggest moments in geological science in the 20th century, one of the big moments in science and understanding of our Earth. Now we'll take a closer look at, and this, I'm sorry about the quality of the photo. This is a scan from a newspaper. It's the best I have, however. This is Hester feeding Stella in 1984. Stella was raised in Greenwich Village, believe it or not, until, it was too small and too much of a city for a lamb. So the lamb was given to the Casons to raise. And I think the picture tells us a lot about Hester from what we can tell. First of all, I don't know if you remember the face of her father, but she has her father's face, the Haring nose. She's a nurturing type. She's holding the bottle for the lamb. I'm really struck by her right hand, which is, carefully holding the lamb in place, but there's a lot of strength in that hand. She's in a back to farm gear. She's got a plaid shirt, khaki pants on. So we have a portrait of a woman who is very strong, very nurturing, really a back to land person in connection with nature. I think are important elements that I see in this one picture. The farm had as many as 34 sheep at one time. In this picture, and unfortunately we can't see the figures in the back, this is a picture of Hester taking a photograph of Jim, who's feeding some of the sheep. They had a total of 34. They did not raise these sheep for meat. Jim, in fact, said he raised sheep because he didn't have to mow the two meadows. So that was his real calling, and that they found other homes for the sheep as time went on. This dark shape here is, in fact, the black sheep. That's the ram of that particular era named Noir. So those of us who remember walking by North Broadway and seeing the sheep, which is an unusual sight in Upper Nyack, within Rockland County in the late 20th century, we were all stunned to see the sheep there. In fact, lacking any other name, we tended to call it the sheep farm, or at least the neighbors called it the sheep farm. Now, just to close our brief history, we're taking a look at Hester Haring Cason's essay that was published in the Journal News, actually, in whole. And the assignment for class, this is apparently her graduation essay, or one of her essays then, the assignment was for Brotherhood Week. Yeah, I know it's Brotherhood, it's not Sisterhood, it's, it's the 1940s. But she suggests in her essay that we substitute, instead of tolerance and discrimination, we substitute the words friendliness and understanding. And she closes, I sincerely believe that if we could only have a friendly understanding of our brother man, of whatever race, of whatever religion, the country in which we live would be a better place. Now that's a great sentiment for its time and a great sentiment for today. I think it says a lot for this strong, nurturing, back to nature woman that inhabited Riverhook for so many years, from 1930 to 2013. And with that, I'll close our very brief history of Riverhook. And I will turn this back over to Bill. Thank you, everyone.
Well done, Mike. incredible. Through maps and photographs and your research, you really allowed us to travel back in time. I'd like to ask Rosemary if she did see any questions in the chat. We have a couple of minutes for questions and answers. We're going to make every effort to engage everyone we can. Obviously, there's some complexity here and in the technology, but we certainly want to here we go. So we have a question from Marty Schulman. And this might not be for Mike. So we have the board of Riverhook, the Friends of Riverhook on board. Are the buildings open for tour? Let me see. Should we try to find Rosemary? Can we find Paul or
Let me see.
Karen?
Karen.
Somebody want to unmute and answer that from the board?
Well, this is Karen Tarapata. I am the mayor of Upper Nyack. I can answer the question. The buildings are not currently open for tour. They are not in a state yet to be shared to the community. We're working to, let's say, get them to that point. But at this point, let's say the main house, there has been water damage in the living room floor. We're not certain that it is safe to walk in. We can do limited tours, and we can bring people into the main house, into the hallway, up the stairs. There are some rooms, but currently it's not open. There's still a bit of mold. There are things that we're not entirely certain are safe for people to tour. The stone barn, we're working to secure the foundation and to remediate a few things. Hopefully by next summer, we will be able to do some specific tour days.
Great, thank you, Karen. So I may have missed some here.
Bill,
You want to go, Rosemary?
I'm looking at the chat. Karen Koziel asked if the sheep were used for wool and if there were knitters at Riverhook. Does anyone have an answer to that question?
Yeah, I wish I could say. I don't really know. They must have been sheared because that's the right way to take care of. But I'm not sure what they did with the wool. So that's a good question, and we'll have to figure that one out. Thank you.
I have one here from Catherine Hall I can grab quickly. It says, can the public walk on the property without going into the structures? And that question is absolutely. That's how most people now engage the property. It's a wonderful stroll. Unfortunately, it's not downhill in both directions.
Yeah,
Only
but
downhill.
That's Nyack in general. So yeah, if you were taking a walk through the preserve, you know, that road that we looked at in so many maps over a period of time, it's there. It's a beautiful walk. There's so many different environments to experience there. It's just darn pretty all the time. No matter what the season is, there's always something natural to pay attention to. So yes, do take a walk.
Rosemary, any other questions?
Yeah, I can second that. Anne Marie O'Brien is wondering how Hester and Jim met. Michael.
Yeah, there's different stories that have been told about that, so I'm not really sure. And I unfortunately I wasn't able to talk with Hester about this, but they did meet at Lamont Doherty, I believe. There's different stories. They met on a voyage. I'm not sure that that's true. Jim was an electrical engineer.
I can answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Dive in.
I'm Bill Ryan. I worked at Lamont.
Oh, wow.
Hester was my secretary for about 5 years.
Good.
I trained under Bruce Hazen and Marie Tharp, so I assisted in all those map makings. Wow. And we used to do a expedition every springtime on the Duke University Marine Lab ship, the Eastward, sometimes going to the Caribbean, where we would be in huge winds. And Jim Cason was the Marine supervisor there at the Duke University Marine Laboratory in Beaufort, North Carolina. So they met on the eastward on the ship, and it went from there.
Wow.
That's
Beautiful.
That's
Thank
great.
you so much.
Yep. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. One thing, it would be really great, the more stories and documents and photographs we can collect, let's, find a way to share that. We'd really, really appreciate anything you have of relevance that would add to our story. So thank you very much for that.
We used to go to dinner parties there and New Year's Eve parties.
Great.
Well, I've had the privilege of doing some oral histories with the Historical Society and with the Nyack Library. And certainly this is a topic I think that would warrant some recording. So I'd love to, Mr. Ryan, catch up with you and
Okay, anytime.
get something on tape.
Yeah.
Although this is being tape recorded, so that's wonderful that people can hear you help fill in some of the gaps from our understanding of this history and the romantic parts, the best parts. Rosemary, what we have about 4 minutes for
Okay.
questions, and then we'll go. And then anyone who doesn't have their question answered, if it's in the chat, we'll get back to you.
Yeah. Ed Acker is asking, he's saying, I grew up in South Brooklyn where there was a Haring Street and a Knapp Street. Any relation to these Upper Nyack families?
Well, it's a good question. The Haring family is one of the pivotal families of Rockland County. So there are literally hundreds of Harings in Rockland County. And I'm not sure about the Knapp family. Those families go way back. So the map we were looking at from that period is, that's 250 years ago. So it tells you, kind of how long these families have been in the area. There were Harings that participated in the Revolutionary War that were from Rockland. So, they're families that are of Dutch heritage, mainly. So the families do go way back in the Hudson River Valley history. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're related somewhere in the early generations.
Rosemary, any other questions?
There was one other, but I think it's going to be answered in the next part of the presentation. Dr. Stephen Kurtz was asking if you can describe the plan going forward for the property, but that will be answered.
That is
part of it.
That is a perfect segue. We call that a perfect.
Well, that's wonderful. So that's the next thing.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. Every Thursday, right? Nyack People and Places, Nyack News and Views. What's your next column on? Oh, he's muted.
Yeah, I'm muting now. So yeah, my column this week is going to be on what is known as the Yellow Rock. It is a rock that was in the river by Upper Nyack and became the rock in front of the Nyack Library with the Gettysburg Address on it. So look for that. Interesting little local story. Very local story.
Teams of horses dragged that rock. Wow, that's great. All right, thank you very much, Mike. So this is very exciting to pivot forward to the future, and it's a future that we all hold in our hands, and it's a future that we can shape and has been shaped. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce a representative of a Brooklyn-based architecture firm, Public Record. It's a multidisciplinary design studio that work across architecture, urbanism, and the environment. They engage both architecture and the strategic processes that realize and sustain it. By joining projects at their inception, they seek to uncover latent possibilities in the built environment and bring them to life through design. Public Record Design works collaboratively with towns, institutions, nonprofits, and community leaders. Tonight, we are joined by Jonathan Malloy. Jonathan grew up in South Nyack, where his parents still reside, and attended nearby Blue Rock School for his elementary years. Now, I wasn't going to note this until the serendipity that's been a major part of this project emerged again. And Jonathan went to the same school that Hester, Haring, Cason attended, Dwight Englewood, and was actually a student of my fiancée, Marisol Diaz. So I was leaving that out, Jonathan, until Hester put it back in.
The good
So
detail.
Jonathan earned his BA from Swarthmore College and holds a Master of Architecture from Yale School of Architecture, where he was named the AYA Future Leader in the Arts. In addition to public record, Jonathan is a designer at Marvel Architects. He's executed multiple design build projects in New York and Pennsylvania as an independent practitioner and is a visiting professor at Swarthmore College. Jonathan and PR's other designer, Laura Serpa Marrero, discovered Riverhook by chance while biking through the neighborhood and were taken with its dormant beauty and reached out to the village of Upper Nyack to learn more. The design vision drafted by public record is based on public comments and input from the board of the Friends of Riverhook. And we'll talk to you about how that project was made possible. But right now I'm glad and happy and proud to introduce you to Jonathan Malloy.
Hey, everybody. So I will bring this up. So as Bill mentioned, we started this project maybe over a year ago, but it's really taken shape in the past, say 4 months with a collaboration with the Friends of Riverhook. And what we want to share, what I'm going to share with you today is really the culmination of our work with the Friends of Riverhook to produce really a vision, an optimistic vision for what this preserve can become moving into the future. As you've seen, it's a large property with a lot in it. So I'm going to go through the book, which really captures all of the work together quickly, but it's available to be viewed at your leisure on the website that's been put together for the preserve, which is riverhook.org, where you can see it both on the website digitally and as a full book. So hopefully you'll have questions and curiosities that you'd like to follow up on. You can ask some questions afterwards. So don't be taken aback by what might be a blur of a lot of content. But keep in mind any questions that might come up as I go through it. So this book, again, was made possible by the support of Ray Wright. So thank you, Ray, and hope that this will seem a valuable use of your money. So, of course, this book begins with the preserve today, and we've seen now quite a few beautiful depictions of it in its current state, which, as Bill mentioned, really has a character of dormancy and a sense of wilderness almost, that I think Pascal's short poem really animates in a way that hopefully everyone will experience in person themselves by visiting the site. And one of the main focuses was, of course, how these buildings that have such histories will become animated with programs moving forward. So the history, which of course you've seen, was very important to us in the process. Here is actually a doctored image that we made showing that original form of the Sheep's Meadow along Broadway, its relationship to the original 6 farms, and how those 6 farms may have possibly appeared from the Hudson River. And of course, the depictions that exist in the living room of the house, which show the much longer and more complex history of the site than the one that we're most knowledgeable about today, most namely the Lenape land on which it sits. And so the history is something that we were looking at finding space to engage. And so that really takes place through a vision, which was born out of a mission statement written by the Friends of Riverhook, and really takes shape through 4 guiding principles, which are environment, arts, education, and innovation. And those 4 goals really seek to dovetail the existing infrastructures of the greater Nyack area, shown through many organizations and events that are already happening. And so those mission and organizing principles find their way into space through strategies. And the three that we developed were the following: restore natural landscapes, reinvent existing buildings, and create spaces to gather. And so as those three strategies play out across the entire site, not just the main path, which is it's currently occupiable space, the site becomes fully animated through activities and programs, and eventually manifests itself into a full plan. And so here you can see that site that we've just seen in its many different states, spanning from Broadway to Midland, and finding much more activity than has perhaps ever existed there. And so I'll take you through 8 of those spaces in a bit more detail, and what will occupy each of these spaces and how they might engage some of the questions that have come up today, and even imagine things that perhaps weren't considered beforehand. So the first of those is the entrance. There was even a question about parking. Currently on Midland, this is the sort of informal parking area at the moment, but it's a goal of the Friends of Riverhook to find parking spaces for the preserve that exist not as an eyesore, but is actually a part of the park itself. And so here you can see that parking area that is sort of included and becomes a part of an entry sequence into the preserve that is integrated into the natural landscape and actually contributes back to it with the planting of trees and a buffer to the street that provides a formal presence on Midland. The caretaker's cottage, which we saw the early sketches for, which became a single-story beautiful brick structure, becomes, through the simple change of the existing asphalt roof with a glass roof, becomes a greenhouse and an anchor of interior resources and spaces for ecological study and gardening work in support of the village garden, which is already developing with the hard work of Paul Curley, one of the board members, and Tracy, a former resident, which hopefully will become a much larger resource for the community, with the possibility of having a winter garden or interior spaces for classes and workshops and otherwise. There are also many other pre-existing natural spaces on the site that are not easy yet to occupy because of the overgrowth, one of which is a clearing, as we've been calling it, or really an outdoor room that exists up at the southwest of the site, which brought us to some more simple and subtle natural interventions to celebrate these pre-existing spaces, be it by mowing a patch of flat land in the center of this clearing that would allow sort of casual, informal outdoor activities, as well as the exhibition of outdoor sculpture. And then those accessed and animated by a network of paths, which allow, again, movement throughout the parts of the site that are currently inaccessible, and creates a platform for the potential installation of art. Another important space, and even more now these days, the time of COVID, is an outdoor amphitheater where the arts can find a place to really be given a stage. And so that found its space on an existing hill and one of the few, if only, views of the river on the site. And so that view, framed through trees and over the roof of the Haring house, becomes the stage set of an outdoor amphitheater, which you can see here on the left, the house and river becoming really the backdrop of any play or performance that might take place there, as well as the opportunity for a lookout so on the edge of this amphitheater that could provide space for both viewing the river from an elevated standpoint, or things like bird watching or simple enjoyment of the atmosphere. And then at the center of the site, the core of the site, and the four most familiar buildings, including the Haring house and the stone barn, really become an anchor of the the programming, the more permanent programming based on the mission of arts and history and gathering and education. And they're really anchored by a natural plateau in the site and the topography of the site that connects the what we're calling the old stone barn, the old carriage house, to the Haring house, which with a slightly formalized landscape can really become almost like a plaza that anchors the two sides of the site. And so the Haring house, really the site of the most history, its most recent history that we just discussed, and at the joint between the Broadway meadow and the hill behind, becomes really the site of public gathering. And its interior, which we saw a plan of, is really quite lovely. Its narrow volume allows light in from all sides. It has some beautiful openings already. And so this, with some subtle intervention of removing walls and replacing partitions with millwork and shelves, that those main rooms of the first floor, originally the living spaces, can become the site of potential public amenities, whether it's a cafe, a meeting space, a library, and that really has the opportunity to develop with the programming of the preserve. And those spaces open up onto an expanded patio that overlooks the Broadway meadow and connects over to the old stone barn, providing really an outdoor space for events as well as casual gathering. The second floor of the house, originally the domestic spaces are at a much smaller scale and provide an opportunity to develop programs that exist at this scale, particularly the educational goals of the Friends of Riverhook, as it could potentially become spaces for after-school programs, art resources, offices for nonprofits, or otherwise. And here you can see a view of the updated west elevation looking across that meadow, which could become the site of a pollinator garden or wildflowers, and a circle revived as a reflecting pool. The spring house, which is of that same local sandstone, exists right at the edge between the meadow and the stream, and was likely built as a place to store food and keep it cool using the temperature of the stream, and is a very small structure, much more at the scale of children than at the scale of adults. And so it becomes the home of a natural playground, with the addition of a small sculptural wood structure on the top of the sandstone foundation that becomes both a marker of new life on the site, a sort of sculpture for the site itself, as well as a space of play and reverie for children. It's inside, having a surprise of color and a oculus up to the sky above. And it also, at its scale and materiality, presents an opportunity for collective building that could potentially be built by the community and have something of a barn raising to bring people together around the site's new life. The old stone barn, which is this beautiful building of local fieldstone as well, but is perhaps belied by its interior, which currently is a little cut up and dark because it was originally meant for horses, and the upstairs suffers from damage to the roof. And so this, through rather simple interventions that could also help its structural issues, it becomes the home of both art and history on the site. Its main spaces being converted into a gallery and exhibition space, where in an exciting way, both contemporary art, be it produced on the site or nearby, can be exhibited alongside historical objects and artifacts that allow a critical engagement of the site, be it the wallpaper that's originally located in the living spaces of the house, or some of those incredible drawings of the seafloor could even be perhaps the foundations for new commentary or new artworks that speak to the relevance of those historical objects today. And from the exterior, you can see that central plaza extending over to the lower level of the stone barn, which could be the site of workshops and artistic spaces for the creation of large-scale art, which could happen out in public. A new roof that will bring as well as a reinforcement of the structure that could bring new life to the exterior presence of the building as well. And lastly, as we saw earlier, the white cottage, which became derelict some time ago, but stands on top of a beautiful sandstone foundation, again, of locally quarried stone, is directly adjacent to the stone barn, and where the stone barn provides a space to exhibit art, we saw this sandstone foundation as an opportunity to create a platform for the creation of art. And so becomes actually the base for 2 new purpose-built artist studios, which could be the site of an artist residency. And so the sandstone foundation, which was once the cistern for the house, is reborn as a water garden with 2 cedar-clad artist studios perched on top of it. Their roofs actually providing water from their rooftops into the garden and creating a small ecosystem within themselves, and their interiors being designed and coordinated for both privacy, natural light, and an operability that would allow an artist to work essentially outside in their studio. And again, provides an opportunity as perhaps one of the only new structures on the site, a way to engage practices of contemporary sustainable construction and design that could both be perhaps a positive contribution to the field as an experimental way to build buildings that are considerate to their sites where the natural landscape is such a priority, and also brings new life to this idea of water, which actually has even more history and significance to the site than we knew designing this, but really finding a way to celebrate that brings both passive, pleasant sounds and surroundings to those walking through, and a productive way for things to be created on the site as well as just viewed. And so that brings us to the end. I moved very quickly through that, so I expect there would be questions. And again, I think you can go view this book at your leisure on the website, as well as being in touch with any of us to find out more about any of these proposals.
Thank you, Jonathan. Wonderful. Absolutely. Rosemary, do we see any questions in the chat?
The only question I saw, I think you sort of addressed, Bill, was from, hold on, Marty Schulman was asking if you considered supplanting solar panel on the glass roof to provide sustainable energy for proper lighting and other needs.
Jonathan?
Sure. Yeah, I think we were looking at alternative energy sources, and certainly, as I think, if I didn't make clear, this is really what we were seeing as a vision document that I think hopefully sparks excitement and ideas like that. That if the caretaker's house could be reborn as a greenhouse, I think the idea of adding something like solar panels that could double as shading devices for the proper lighting of the space, I think is exactly the kind of thing that could be developed as the idea itself evolves beyond just a few images and is expanded through ultimately the design of a building that would be built. So I think absolutely finding ways for not only water to be an important feature of the site, but also the production of energy and the way that it's used. So absolutely.
All right, so there are 3 questions that have come up, and we have one more final presentation, so we'll try to get them. Actually, that was a 4th. So if we don't get to your question right now, we will respond. So the first one I saw was if there was a thought about bringing back the sheep. I don't think that's a Jonathan question, so maybe I'll pause that and Paul, the president of Friends of Riverhook, can pick that up. There is, we lived in the White Cottage and we're told it was part of the Underground Railroad. Any research? So I guess that would go to Mike or to Jonathan.
Yeah, well, there's been a story about that. I'm not certain of, I really believe that while Nyack was a part of the Underground Railroad, it was really mostly handled by African Americans. And so I'm a little cautious about it being at this particular place in an area where, in fact, before 1827, there were enslaved people. So I'm just a little hesitant about that particular story. I don't know if there's any evidence one way or another to say yes or no on that, however.
We're in a part in our program where we're about to bring on a member of the president of the board of the Friends of Riverhook. And some of these questions, if you can help Rosemary grab them before we end, but I'm trying to see if there are any ones that are specifically about architecture. Can you see anything like that?
I'm looking right now. One person, I'm assuming this is related to the architecture. Ed Acker's asking about, because of the public programming, there'll be introduction of accessibility to the site and building renovations as far as, conforming to access laws in New York State and the country.
I think that's certainly something that would come up at the realization of these, but I think certainly the way that some of these buildings are, I think second floors of them might be difficult to access, but many of them are on most of the public spaces that provide the programming are really on the first floors and participate at the level of the site itself. So if you can move through the natural spaces, you would also be able to move through most of the programmed interior spaces. And maybe just, I see one other question, which might have been a similar one from Ed and Alex, but I think this is something that I think indeed is for a larger public. And I think certainly the goal and the underlying ideas of this vision is as a public resource that would serve hopefully, obviously, the residents of Upper Nyack, the Nyacks themselves, and even those beyond. And so I think the ambition for it is to be as public as possible. And to that end, accessible to people of all physical abilities as well as everything else. So I think that's certainly the ambition.
Thank you, Jonathan. So, and there is a question too about how will it be initiated, the phased approach? Well, that is a perfect actually segue to Jonathan. If you could go ahead and end screen share. So I have the opportunity now to introduce the co-founder of Friends of Riverhook in March of 2020, Paul Curley. Previously, Paul served on the board of directors of the Nyack Chamber of Commerce, the Village of Nyack's Architectural Review Board, and Zoning Board of Appeals, and on several Village of Nyack committees, including the Comprehensive Master Plan, the Skate Park, and the Waterfront. Paul graduated from Binghamton University and Columbia Law School and has been a lawyer for over 20 years. He resides in Upper Nyack with his family, 2 cats, and a small flock of backyard chickens. Ladies and gentlemen, to introduce the board of the Friends of Riverhook, the president, Paul Curley.
Well, thank you, Bill. And thanks everyone for these fascinating presentations that have been given so far. And I want to echo Jonathan by expressing a special thanks to Ray Wright for providing the support that was necessary to create the inspirational design vision that Jonathan just shared with us. Obviously, it's a very, very ambitious design vision, and it would be great to see these plans come to life over time. But of course, that takes money, and that's why a group of us got together to form a nonprofit to try to support this vision and this development. And we have a very distinguished board of directors consisting of Upper Nyack Mayor Karen Tarapata, Trustee Laurie Dodge, Allison Crowther, John Colgan, and Daphne Blatt. I'm sure many of you know some of these folks, and you should feel free to reach out to them and share your thoughts about Riverhook. As was mentioned, just recently we launched our website, riverhook.org. And so you could really dig into that and take a look at a closer look at all the proposals that Public Record put together. Also, you can like our Facebook, on our Instagram pages, and you can just stay informed about the developments at Riverhook. We also like to encourage everyone in the community to get actively involved in building this space. It's our space. So whether you'd be interested in volunteering or whether you'd be interested in donating, that would be fantastic. The village is actually hosting a volunteer session this Saturday. So we will be working on native meadow restoration and doing some other basic cleanup activities, which we've been doing. Some of us have been doing for a few months now. So if you're interested in rolling up your sleeves, or if you just want to stop by and say hi and watch other people work, please come by this Saturday. I think the time is 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. So yeah, just seriously, just stop by and see the progress for yourself. And of course, if you're able to donate, we'd be extremely grateful. And donations can be made on the website. Website is there on the screen, riverhook.org, or you can reach out to Bill Batson. You can assist with that. Any amount would be truly appreciated. And I do want to also say thank you to the Nyack Library and to the Nyack Historical Society for sponsoring such really a fascinating program. It was just really great to see, to learn about the site from the oldest history to the future, or what we hope could be the future. So I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. Now, Bill, did you want me to answer some of these questions that had been posed?
There were a couple more in the chat. I mean, the one that I thought we've begun to wrestle with is how is the development of it phased? Do we have a phased approach to initiating this vision?
Yes, and that's such a great question, because as I said, all of this depends on funding that doesn't, that not that much can come from the village itself and village taxpayers. So we need to find other sources of funding, and as we obtain those funds, we can phase in some of the improvements on the site, and so we've been discussing which ones are priority. For example, parking is a very high priority, and a lot of people ask about that. So yeah, there's definitely it's definitely a phased approach. I saw a question about whether we'd be bringing. Is there any thought to bringing the sheep back? I thought that was a fun question. My parents raised sheep, so I grew up with sheep, and I would love to see them frolicking about. But obviously, that would require somebody to manage them. I don't know if I could do that along with managing my chickens. But yeah, so there's no plans for that, although that would really be fun.
We had a question from a couple of people. This is Rosemary from the library about ambient light and how it affects looking at the stars in that part of the neighborhood, because they're concerned it might be too much.
Yeah, that's another great question, and the village could probably respond to that better. But my inclination in terms of what I would like to support would involve not disturbing the ambient light and not disturbing the neighborhood with too much noise or other disruptions. It is intended as mainly a wild space, a place of repose and relaxation. But although we would like to start to incorporate some activities and some gatherings, it's a preserve. It's a preserve, and that name, I believe, was chosen intentionally to capture that spirit, that it's preserve the space, not to create too much noise and light and disruption.
I would also say that in what's been proposed in the vision, of course, this would depend as well on the way the site is eventually used. But I think certainly in terms of ambient light, I think much of the space that's been envisioned is really primarily daytime activities. And I think although perhaps there may be an occasional event at night, depending on how the preserve evolves, and that ideally would be actually a community event that people attend and doesn't interfere with stargazing. So I think the way that it's been imagined is really just trying to bring life to the buildings that maybe are the one feature that might not want to remain completely wild, though perhaps in certain cases like the White House that become the ruins actually find a productive way to be wild that gives back to the ecosystem of the place itself.
We had
Yes.
another.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Rosemary.
That's okay. We had another question wondering, and this might be something that no one knows yet exactly, will the preserve eventually just be for Nyack residents? Will there be a fee charge for people who want to enter the property, or will it be open to everyone?
Well, this is the mayor, this is Karen Tarapata, and there is no intention to charge any fees for entry. It is a preserve. It is for the enjoyment of nature. If, as other programs are developed, that is in addition to that. I don't foresee any charge, because also a charge then requires a gate and a gatekeeper, and I don't see any advantage to that. I hope that answers your question.
I'd like to briefly, I'm Allison Crowther, I'm also on the board. I would like to briefly go back to that last question about leaving the space wild versus developing it up. There's really, and we all can take lessons from this, that there's a beautiful way to preserve the environment, not necessarily letting it go completely wild, but to integrate careful, thoughtful, educational human activity in conjunction with keeping the space as natural as we can. There's a wonderful integration possibility there that we think will help drive our plans.
So
and I just wanted to, Allison, that was very well put, and I do think that what you see with Jonathan's presentation is that there are different zones, some quite wild, some almost untouched, whereas others that which were residential structures formerly would still become places of gathering. So it'd be a nice mixture over the 12 acres.
So there are a good number of questions and not enough time to answer them all. But what I would say is that in the same way that this process was informed over years by meetings, and that all those comments in those meetings have informed every decision that has been made and were provided to the to the public record designers, this is an important moment here. So every question will be they're identified, and we have email addresses. So we'll respond to the questions that are remaining. And but I just wanted to really thank people for spending the time to learn about this, for the presenters, for giving their expertise and sharing their time and talent. And you know, we said we'd be done by 8:30. We're at 8:26. So Paul, however you want to spend the last 4 minutes.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I had 4 minutes, and I know it's been a long presentation. There's been a lot of information. It's been really great. So I only wanted to say I hope I get to see everyone down there at Riverhook sometime. I walk through all the time, and it's just I just went through today, and it's the lower meadow is just so beautiful with the wildflowers and everything. It's just I just find it an inspirational site. And there's so many possibilities, while at the same time keeping it integrated properly within the community, as it is. So
all right, so I'll put up the information again for folks that do want to stay in touch with us. I'm putting up 1 second. I will put up the there we go. I believe, hopefully. I got the logo part right. There we go. Yeah, so yeah, we've just started on Instagram. So if you want, you could like our page, and we're going to keep material up there about other cleanups and events in the future. The website is riverhook.org. You can email us at friendsofriverhook@gmail.com. And thanks to everyone for being a part of this incredible big Zoom room.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Wonderful.
you, Bill.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Thank you,
Great job,
Jonathan. Thank
everybody.
you, Mike Hayes. Thank you, Rosemary.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you,
Thank you,
Pascal.
everyone.
Where's Pascal?
Thank you, Pascal. Very wonderful.
Thank you, everyone. It was amazing.
Many more meetings in the future.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you
Thank you
so
for
much.
a great presentation.
I was using a glass and there was a chip in it. I don't know whether, I didn't know whether the chip occurred when I was using it.
No, probably not. There's a couple of glasses that are chipped.
So I was near the ice and thought there's a possibility of chip got in the ice. So I dumped all the ice, washed it out.
That's why it was so much noise. I couldn't hear it once.
This is the most interesting part.
This is great.
Sorry, Mike. I didn't mean the most interesting. I said
Stop recording.
interesting addendum.
Yeah, what's going on? Be quiet. Oh, sorry.
And, yeah, domestic situation.
Hi, Connie.
So Bill,